I want to welcome you, as always, to a Credit Safe webinar. It is exciting to be with you. It is my pleasure every week to be here and to chat with you, to engage with you and get to engage with these awesome experts that we get to talk to and have some time with. My name is Nathan Kolb. I am head of brand engagement for Credit Safe USA, and want to just welcome you to the third part of this series that we have been doing with our partner company, Serrala. And we're going to talk about them in a little bit and give you kind of an overview of the series in just a second. But as we're getting everything going here, I want to give you a few instructions, just give you some ideas of how to do this and how we interact, because we want this to be engaging. We don't want it to just be one-sided, us telling you something and you just listening. So at the bottom of your screen, there is a little text bubble that says Q&A. That is how you ask us questions, say comments, give us kudos, whatever you would like to do. That is your way to communicate with us. Our speakers may not be watching that the whole time, but I will be. I will be monitoring that 24/7, and we'll give any information to them as to what's going on, ask any questions, what have you. Those of you that have been with us before, you know how this works. But please make sure you do that. Now we do have a bit of a presentation today. So once that presentation is concluded is when I will ask all the questions and everything and interact with them in that regard on your behalf. Additionally, I want to remind you that this is being recorded and that the information that you provided for your registration will be used by the companies to send you follow-up information. So there is some sharing to that, and that's part of the compliance stuff that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but it's part of the legalities that we have to get out of the way in the beginning, that you are doing that, and you're going to get a follow-up email from either Credit Safe or Serrala or both that talks about the webinar that you've had, including the way to watch the recording and any other links to other information, as well as the other webinars in this series that we've done. So like I said, we've been doing this series with both Credit Safe and Serrala. And in case you're not familiar with both companies, I'll give you a little information on each one of them. Serrala is a global B2B fintech software company. They optimize the universe of payments for organizations seeking efficient cash visibility and secure financial processes. As an SAP partner, Serrala supports over 2,500 companies worldwide with advanced technology, intelligent automation, and personalized consulting. Their comprehensive end-to-end portfolio automates inbound and outbound payment processes, as well as the management of related data and documents. As the world's most used provider of business intelligence, Credit Safe owns and maintains one of the most comprehensive and rapidly expanding business databases with credit information on over 365 million companies worldwide. They're changing the way businesses use information by offering a collection of products and solutions that help companies leverage their domestic and international credit reports, company data, principal information, domestic and international judgments, and credit scores to make smarter business decisions. In this joint webinar series that we've been doing, Customers, Connections, and Compliance, it's focused on the what, the why, and the how of managing your overall KYC or Know Your Customer process. In today's uncertain environment, it's more important than ever to have that real-time access integrated with your system to your payment, customer payment, and your credit data. Today's webinar is going to be the conclusion of this series, our third part, and it's going to be explaining how Credit Safe's business data and information and everything that's set up in there can be integrated with Serrala's technology, their expertise, and their solutions to give you an overall compliance and risk mitigation solution that can be right in your system. So we are fortunate, as always, and this is one of the best parts of my job, is to get to interact with these great experts in their fields. Michael Kohler this is the third time he's been with us. He has been the Serrala spokesperson each and every time. He is the principal solution architect for Serrala with over 10 years experience working in order to cash field. Michael's present and previous roles have given him a unique insight into the best practices in managing credit and compliance risks, as well as collections operations for businesses of various sizes and industries. Chris Hutchins, or Hutch, is Credit Safe's expert on all things compliance and has been in the industry for over 7 years. He handles everything in the world of compliance across the globe for Credit Safe. He's carefully studied the new and existing AML and sanctions screening legislation to make sure that Credit Safe customers stay ahead of the competition when it comes to AML or KYC. When not battling for compliance understanding, Chris has compiled an impressive boxing record of 5-0. So, not only is he going to fight you with keeping you compliant, he might just fight you. So be careful. He's a bit of a bruiser. But gentlemen, welcome. It's great to have you as always. Looking forward to this.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So Chris, I think you've got the stuff there. So we're going to let you guys start out, and like we've done in the past, folks, it's going to be kind of an interactive back and forth between both companies, trying to let you know what's going on in this world. So enjoy. And again, if you need to ask any questions or anything throughout the entire presentation, please feel free to do that. We're not going to stop you from doing that. Just know that you probably won't get them answered until the very end.
Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. So I think we'll begin with me. If I can just get this. Here we go. So what I'm going to touch on a little bit today is what credit safe mean by compliance, or what we mean by compliance in general. And there's two main reasons you may think you're listening to this and it doesn't affect you so much. One, because you're a credit controller or you work in the world of finance and the compliance industry. The second would be that you're in a non-regulated industry. Something that outside of banking or finance traditionally that hasn't had to do these kind of checks. So I've got good news and bad news. What we're seeing with our customers globally, in the US included, is that not only are finance managers and credit controllers starting to get involved in the process, because people are seeing this as one syndicated onboarding process, rather than having a compliance department and a finance department or a credit department. These are all becoming one department, and the modern business will have them in one streamlined process. And also that if you'd looked at CreditSafe's portfolio of customers about 5 years ago, anyone that was buying compliance solutions or anyone in the industry would have been in the regulated sector. They would have been in banking, accountancy, legal firms. Now, when we look at our portfolio, we're seeing that the vast majority of our customers are made up by those in the corporate sector, mainly those in construction, shipping, oil and gas and pharmaceuticals, but there's a whole mix of other industries in there as well. The reason for this is that people have discovered recently that there's a benefit to screening for sanctions. Sanctions screening is something that everyone needs to take part in, not just the regulated sector. It's something that affects every single person, every single business. If you get caught doing business with someone that's on a sanctioned entity, the regulatory authorities are not going to look at you and say, well, you weren't in a regulated sector. They're just going to see the crime. So what we're going to try and do today is educate you a little bit as to what the terms that have come out of the regulated sector mean, what they mean for credit safe, what we can do to deliver products and services to help you, and along with Serrala, what we're doing to work forward to give you solutions that is going to make your life easier. So just to touch on quickly what I've got on my screen currently, compliance can mean a whole host of things. It can mean anywhere from regulatory compliance to anti-money laundering compliance to even health and safety compliance. But what we really mean when we discuss compliance is these four key areas. So sanction screening, which applies to everyone, anti-money laundering or KYC, which mainly applies to the regulated sector, and they stand for anti-money laundering and know your customer. And then something that applies to everyone, maybe more the regulated sector, but it's important to everyone to be aware of, which is counter-terrorism funding. Just move on to the next slide. Oh. There we go. So the main way I can differentiate between what the regulated sector do and what the non-regulated sector are doing is between anti-money laundering and sanction screening. Now, sanction screening applies to everyone, and quite confusingly, anti-money laundering sanction screening is part of that. So the anti-money laundering process, where there is a set number of rules that you need to carry out if you're in a certain industry. So you need to verify the identity of an individual that you're about to do business with. The best example of this is if you go and open a bank account and you need to take forms of identification in with you to prove you are who you say you are and you're not being fraudulent, that's identity verification. Transaction screening, which is if you're sending large amounts of money either into or out of the country, the compliance officers within those banks or builder societies or whoever you're dealing with may want to check they're not linked and the money you're sending isn't linked to terrorism or war crimes or any dodgy people. And then the sanctions screening. So you want to make sure that who you're dealing with isn't on a sanctions list. They're not based in Iran. They're not based in North Korea. You want to be very careful around the areas of Ukraine and Russia. You need to make sure that you're doing business with people who you can. And that's not to say they're the only people that are on sanctions lists. There's American individuals on sanctions lists, American business on the OFAC list. You've got the HMRC list. You've got the UN, EU list. There's 7 or 8 major sanctions lists around the globe. And sanctions screening itself is for everyone. And it's exactly what I just touched on in the sanctions screening for the regulatory or regulated sector. It's exactly that. You want to make sure that who you're doing business with, you can do business with them. It's not like the authorities are going to tell you you need to be doing this, but they'll be very quick to tell you when you're not doing it if you get caught doing business with someone you shouldn't be doing business with. So just to go a bit further into that and explain who would be on a sanctions list, it tends to be made up by the vast majority of these here. Obviously, there's a whole host of reasons you could be included, but we're mainly looking at terrorist groups. Traditionally, the anti-money laundering legislation first came in before September 11th to manage drug cartels and money crossing the border. Now, modern day, the focus is more on counterterrorism and making sure that any money that's being sent isn't being sent to any terrorist group. But it's also linked to organized crime. I'm sure Al Capone would be on the list if he was still about today. Same for money launderers, fraudsters, and then the political game they play with economic sanctions, where you can't do business with certain regions for political reasons. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit about what we're doing at CreditSafe to help you with this. And it's not for us to just give you a product and say, there you go. We need to have an understanding of what's going on in the market, what the legislation is. Modern day, we're seeing more and more businesses do business cross-border. It's very rare you get a business that's not localized, that's solely trading within one country. Obviously, the US is an exception to the rule because it's such a big country and there's 50 states and they've all got different climates and there's a huge market there. But especially in the EU and other places outside the US, you'll find that the legislation differs from place to place. So it's for us or for me in CreditSafe to understand this legislation. So if you're a US business, but you're trading into France or Germany, for instance, you need to know, and I need to be able to tell you that you need to be aware of the 5th EU Money Laundering Directive. Confusingly as well, the Sanctions Regulatory Authority will be different to the Anti-Money Laundering regulatory body. But what we're working towards doing is delivering information that will help you mitigate this risk that is compliant with regulations wherever in the world you may be trading. The way we do this is by delivering compliance information in 3 main spaces. The first one is adverse media screening, which is any bad press related to predicate crimes to anti-money laundering or anything related to terrorism, human trafficking, forced slavery. We will deliver over 30,000 news sources screening comprehensively for those key terms that links anyone you're doing business with to those activities. We'll also give you sanctions and enforcement screening. So even though there's 8 major sanctions lists, you wouldn't include the FBI's most wanted list on the sanctions list. They would be counted as a watch list or an enforcement list. And there's around 5,000 of them globally that we pull into the database and display to our customers. And then politically exposed person. That's a bit of a European term. You may know the term foreign national or foreign politician. You need to know if someone's in a certain position of political power, if you're in the regulated space, because they're more susceptible to corruption. And make of that what you will with the current political global landscape. I'm sure you can all think of a politician you'd suspect was corrupt at some point or other. So I suppose this, Michael, this brings us on to what Serrala can do with this information to add value to the.
Yeah, Chris, you're right. So obviously, as you said, the need for your compliance due diligence is growing as companies do more business internationally and also within the non-regulated space. But what we see at Serrala, as we provide finance solution to companies, is that most companies have a very manual process around the onboarding. Just the very onboarding process of either customers or suppliers is very manual. That obviously can make it a very costly process as well. And on the other hand, the environment, like the IT environment that companies are working in can be very interruptive, where they have certain information provided by their customers or suppliers in one space. Then they do their risk screening or scoring in, I don't know, an Excel sheet or some tool. And then on the other hand, they go to CreditSafe and log on to their web portal to check new customers or suppliers against watch lists. So you see there's a lot of like different spots involved and maybe even different people. So all those like workflows tend to be very manual and cumbersome. And obviously that makes it a cost factor within a business's operation.
Completely agree. And that's traditionally, if we'd have gone back 5 years, like I mentioned previously, we had customers go in to one product to do one type of check, another product to another type of check, and another product to another type of check. And obviously Serrala are able to automate that, which makes the whole process far easier.
Yeah.
I think we discovered before this meeting that we're both Serrala and CreditSafe's strategy is quite in line with this slide. So just from a CreditSafe point of view, and especially a compliance point of view, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be proactive, not reactive. And for us, this means we need to be aware of legislation before it. We need to be aware that something's going to change 6, 12, 18 months down the line, so we can begin building solutions and advising our customers about this as well. And we also want to focus on doing the basics well and making any changes simple but significant. We don't want to overcomplicate everything with too much data, too much irrelevant data. We want to make sure you're getting to the correct data, the relevant data, as quickly as possible, so you don't have to sift through rubbish before you get to that.
Yeah, so as you said, we're very well aligned there. The very motto or slogan of Serrala is bringing clarity to complexity. So we obviously want to help our clients to take the complexity out of their business processes and like simplify them as much as possible. Sometimes you can, but you can at least do something to streamline them or make them more efficient. So later on, we're going to touch on that a little bit, how exactly we help companies to be more efficient in their compliance process along with CreditSafe. But we also want to enable our customers to be proactive and not just reacting to the information they receive. And we've got several alert features and other capabilities factored into our solutions that really help our customers to be proactive.
So what we want to touch on this side is how seamlessly we can integrate the CreditSafe information into Connect. This means that we're able to deliver through a single API our business information as well as our credit information, regulatory information, as well as adverse media, all through the same place.
Yeah, and so if some of you watched last week's webinar, we touched on like the technicalities of that quite a bit when we showed our CreditSafe connector that Serrala developed in partnership with CreditSafe that allows you to pull business information, in that case, into SAP. And obviously that same interface, that same connector helps you to integrate compliance information into your ERP system. And so on the next slide, I think we're going to touch a little bit on how and where exactly that comes in. So first of all, a no-brainer, the onboarding process. Basically, both on the customer, but also on the supplier side. And I just want to touch a little bit on that. So at Serrala, we have obviously a very classic, traditional customer risk management tool. But I think it was like 7 years ago, we developed that same solution also for the supplier side of things, because we had some very specific interest and expressed in that by some companies that were doing supplier risk screening. And to us, it made perfect sense, you know, that if you're in a certain industry, or like depending on how crucial your supplier is and your whole supply chain and manufacturing chain, you really want to make sure you risk screen also your suppliers, because for some companies, if their suppliers are in financial risk and cannot deliver, that will have a trickle-down effect into their production, and then the ability to deliver to their customers with tremendous, potentially hazardous effects on their own cash flows. So that's why we then developed the same thing on the supplier side, and also on the supplier side, and especially on the supplier side, we've seen that there is a big need to do your compliance due diligence. Because obviously on the customer side, you want to make sure you don't do business with any companies that could use your products in a way, you know, that either furthers terrorism, or with companies that are on those sanction lists, or countries that are on sanction lists, right? But on the supplier side also, you want to make sure you're not paying a company, irrespective of the service or the products that you receive. You do not want to pay a company that is involved in some way in terrorism or any fraudulent activities that you can then receive a fine for, and basically that's a criminal act. And as you said, Hutch, authorities, they do not tread lightly there. The fines, or you know, whatever you receive for that, that's something to reckon with. So obviously you want to make sure before you onboard a new supplier and make sure and like put up the master data in your system, you want to make sure that they are not on any kind of sanction list, or they don't have anyone in their like management organization that is on those, you know, politically exposed persons lists. So obviously in the onboarding piece, we integrated the credit safe information seamlessly with the onboarding workflow of new customers and suppliers, meaning that while you're like working with the workflow in the Serrala tool, on the same screen, you can trigger a compliance check against whatever list you choose on the credit safe database, and have that information seamlessly flow back into your system without you having to log off and log on to another system. So that obviously is huge time savings. But on the other hand, what it also does, it helps you to document well that you did your due diligence, because that's the other part of the equation. It's not just like doing a due diligence, but upon an audit, you have to be able to produce documentation that you did your due diligence, and like what was the like check result that came back from the credit safe database, who did that, when did they do that. So all these like data points are stored within the onboarding solution that Serrala has for customers and suppliers, and you will have the complete audit trail there as well. So obviously that is a hugely important thing. And then when we talk about continuous monitoring, obviously it's very important to be, you know, continuously on the watch, not just in terms of like your credit risk, more the financial risks, but also in terms of compliance risks. So what we did at Serrala there, we, you know, we factored in proactive alerts, you know, if new credit safe information comes to light into the solution that sends out automatic alerts to your either credit manager or compliance officer. It enables you to do periodic reviews, get even reminders for periodic reviews, and even more importantly, in the payment solution that we have factored the compliance check into the payments workflow. So if we go to the next slide, I think that explains it a little more in detail. What first of all, what we've traditionally done, obviously, traditionally, we've always had some kind of fraud monitor factored into our payment solution. And for those of you that are not so familiar with Serrala's payment solution, it basically helps you to build a payment factory, executing all your payments from one single place and have an authority workflow, signatures, and everything in one place. And I'm probably not doing it justice by oversimplifying it, but that's not really the scope of this webinar. But what I really wanted to point out here is that this fraud monitor, where you can do fraud scoring on single transaction basis within a payments batch, for example, 2 years ago, we factored into that process a compliance check where we can do a check against blacklists, whitelists, sanction lists, PEP lists, and all that. All the stuff that you mentioned, Hutch, you can do that before you send out the payment batch, even to the approver. Because it's one thing, yes, the bank might do it for you before they send out payments, but you really do not want to just depend on a third party doing it for you. Because if something goes wrong, it's not just the bank that will be held accountable. It's you, because you are the sender of the payment. So the next slide gives a little high-level overview diagram of like how exactly we do that in the Serrala solution. So basically, from any of your ERP systems, you might initiate payments. That is then obviously pushed through the Serrala payment solution. Different bells and whistles there around the process. But the more important thing that we want to highlight here is before the file gets sent to the approver to approve the payment transactions, you can have a check initiated of checking the receivers of the payments against various lists on the CreditSafe database. And if there should be a hit on one of the lists, then obviously those transactions will be flagged and either sent through like with a red flag to the approver or to whoever else you choose in your organization. So there's different workflow functionalities around that. But the important thing is those transactions will be flagged in your payment batch. And of course, that does not have to stall the payment batch. You can still send the transactions that are fine and approved, but those that are red flagged obviously will be stalled, and you will be able to do your investigation in-house into the receivers of the payments and communicate with the suppliers if needed. So I think that's a very important thing. And actually, lately we've received a lot of interest from prospects and existing customers on that kind of specific functionality, because it has become so much more important today to do your compliance due diligence, not just during the onboarding process, but also when you execute individual transactions.
Yeah, definitely. So to tie it together a little bit, this diagram represents where CreditSafe are able to offer data, and where Serrala then pulls those data sources together. So what we see is the three aspects of business risk. Most issues can be categorized into one of these three buckets. So you can cover your financial risk with the traditional CreditSafe offering, with our business information and our credit reports. The reputational aspect of it then, something we haven't touched on much today, but obviously if you're not in a regulated industry, but you get caught doing business with someone that's sending money to terrorists, for instance, that's going to impact the reputation of your business. So the way we get around this risk is by screening against those 30,000 sources for adverse media. So you want to make sure that your reputation as well stays intact, even if you're not likely to get a regulatory fine. And then the regulatory information comes from those enforcement lists, the watch lists, the foreign nationals, foreign dignitaries, politically exposed people. And together, we're able to bring all of those and give all that information to Michael for him to do for him to do his part.
Yeah, exactly. So you said that perfectly. For Serrala, in our tools, it doesn't really matter what kind of information you want to process, but we enable you to embed that information seamlessly into your workflows, which obviously helps you not just to cut costs, but also have an audit trail available and reproducible if needed.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, Jim.
That brings us to the end.
Yeah, I appreciate it going through there. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and folks, don't feel free. We're gonna take some questions here. So if you have questions that have come up that weren't answered, please feel free to add those in as we're talking here. We do have some time for that. So the first question here is, what about second attribution if a supplier is doing business with someone else that they're not supposed to? Can I be held with that, or does this cover that? I'm summarizing a bit there, so if you need the more explanation from what was said, I can do that, but I'm trying to shorten a long question here.
Yeah, it's very difficult. We do have data where we can tie those businesses together, so we can make business links. But of course, it's very difficult to know exactly who you're doing business with is doing business with that. So it tends to be the rule of one. You can only look after really who you're sending money to, unless you're in the regulated space. You need to follow that to the end. But the answer is, unless you're in a regulated space, no, I shouldn't imagine so. But if you want to get in contact with what the industry is and what the issue is, I can work on that specific case and give you a more detailed answer. Great
stuff. Other question, if you only do business domestically, is this an issue?
I would say it's still, obviously there's a risk, there's less of a risk. If you're only trading domestically, the risk is far lower, because the risk normally tends to come from the unknown. When you're sending money to somewhere you can't really trace. If it's within the US, the risk is less, but obviously the risk is never zero. As I mentioned, there are American businesses listed on the OFAC list. And even from a reputational point of view, I would advise taking some sort of adverse media, just to give you a better picture of who you're doing business with on a day-to-day basis, just for peace of mind, if nothing else.
Sure. Okay, so this one's a two-parter, and I think it's kind of half and half for each of you, which actually makes this work really well. How often are these lists updated? And then how long does it take to get that into the system?
So I can answer from a data perspective. Because there's 35,000 different sources, they're updated at varying rates. So what we would do is, from an ongoing monitoring perspective, we'd run the file of all your customers or all your clients or whoever the names, the search terms you're using, every night, overnight, to see if there's any new information. Obviously, not all lists are going to be updated every day, because some of them are not going to need to be. But the sanctions lists they're available. They're all in one consolidated list. And if that information is available, if something has been updated, then we'll get it before anyone else does, or the same time as anyone else. And it will take, if someone goes on a sanctions list one evening, you'll have the update the next morning.
Yeah, and Hachi said the magic word there, monitoring. So I assume, like, obviously, company or one of your customers needs to be subscribed to some kind of monitoring service, right, to receive those updates. And last week we've seen, actually, when we did the whole Connect overview and demo, that as soon as you have those updates on your database, you can seamlessly, or they are seamlessly actually pushed into your system. So, let's say you have those updates on your database running overnight. In the morning, you get an update alert in your system. And then obviously with the Serrala tool, you can choose, like, what kind of notification do you want to receive, through which channel, who should receive a notification. There's various aspects there, but it's very seamless. Like, it goes back to the whole proactive perspective. You will get a notification, the type of notification that you choose to receive.
Gotcha. And I have one more question right now, and it's basically it's a semi-price question for both of you. So we don't have to quote numbers here, but is this included in your basic setups? Is basically the question here. Is compliance and all this type of stuff just a normal thing that's added for everything, or is this something extra?
Obviously, because of the nature of the data, unlike CreditSafe, where there's traditionally freedom access unless it's in a certain country, there is a price per search, but I would say that the price is very, very reasonable. If I very much doubt you'll find a better price elsewhere.
And I would say compared to any of the fines, I'm assuming it's really reasonable.
It is. So I used to get the mickey taken out of me for when I did my presentations for customers. I used to say, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance.
There you go. And Michael, same thing. I mean, how does that work with the Serrala integrations?
So with Serrala, obviously, we just provide the technology. Well, just provide the technology.
Yeah, right.
I don't want to take any importance away from that, because actually, I've been working in that space for 10 years, and it's become just so normal. But I think if you switch from a manual to an automated process, I think you're changing your world. So for us, with our tools, a connect is included in the basic setup.
Okay. So you're obviously paying for that data, but not the integration.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Well, that takes care of all our questions, and we're a couple minutes ahead of time too, guys. Wow, we did it well here. I want to thank you both for being here, to Serrala and CreditSafe. I'll say thanks to both for putting this together and letting me be the host. It's been a lot of fun doing this, and I look forward to doing it in the future. And folks, if you're interested in any webinars, you can go to either Serrala's website, and I'll let Michael tell you where that one is specifically. I can speak for CreditSafe. If you'd like to see any more CreditSafe webinars, all you have to do is go to info.creditsafe.com/webinars, and it's there. That's where our stuff is. You'll see a list of every webinar we have upcoming and recordings for every webinar we've ever done. So it'll all be there. If you want to, do a binge watch and do a CreditSafe party, please just, tag us on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you put that on, and we will love it. And if you do the same for Serrala, I'm sure they would love it as well. Michael, do you have the website for Serrala's?
Yes. So if you want to follow up, you CreditSafe binge watch with the Serrala binge watch, which is equally awesome. You can go to serrala.com, click on the resources button, and not only will you get the list of all our webinars, you can filter by different product areas or topics, because there's a lot. But you can also, if you're more like the reading kind of person, you can go through our white papers, thought leadership articles with various organizations, and read interviews with experts as well. So it's all on there. Serrala.com, go to resources, and there's a world of information at your fingertips.
There you go. I thought I did well selling it, and Michael, you just showed me up so well there. I appreciate that. And folks, if you didn't get those webinar or those links down, don't worry, they will be in the follow-ups, and you'll be able to find them easily through all that. But once again, Michael Hutch, thank you so much for joining us today. And all of you that are watching and have enjoyed this, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.